My biggest takeaway from that trip was just the reconnection to myself. And when I say myself, I mean my inner child.
Welcome to Fatherhood Voices, breaking the toxic cycle. Dive in as real dads bear all, the mess ups, make-ups, and every heartfelt moment in between. It's raw, it's real, and it might just change the way you see family.
Welcome to another edition of Fatherhood Voices. Excited to have a guest on today named Ade, and he's going to share his journey of growing up and his life, his journey along the way, coming from a different country, and then raising its two boys, and then also how he transitioned from, I read that you were an engineer before.
I was.
And then, so now transitioning from an engineer into this whole space of coaching and spirituality. So excited to hear about that part of your journey also. But with no further ado, let me go ahead and have you introduce yourself to the audience and tell them a little bit about who you are and where you're from. And yeah, we'll kick this off.
Absolutely. I appreciate the welcome, Edward. Thanks for having me on. Just want to give a kudos and thanks to my brother Aaron for reaching out and sharing this platform with me. My name's Ade from Chicago, Illinois. My dad was born in Nigeria, came over here when he was about 21 years old, met my mother. So I was born here actually, and grew up in a fairly, I would say, strict household. My dad was pretty militant with the way that he ran the household. And so I had three options as a Nigerian American here: was become a doctor, lawyer, engineer. I chose the engineering route. And it was great. I enjoyed it while it lasted, but quickly found that I was burnt out, tired, and didn't see myself doing it for too long. And during that time, I had just gotten away from a lot of my things that brought me joy in life. And so, it kind of brought me back, being able to find myself recently, and really dove into a completely different path: spirituality, coaching, men's work, breath work. And a lot of it was triggered by becoming a father and also trying to make and create better relationships with my loved ones, with my partner at the time. So that's kind of a little bit about me. I love to get out in nature. It's one of my pastimes to kind of help keep me grounded, and also keep me present. And I enjoy playing basketball, working out, all the fitness things. But that's a little bit about me.
Nice. So, you were we were raised out here in the States,
Mm-hmm.
and how was life for you as a child? So now you were in a two-parent home.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then was there a lot of love in the home, or were there things now that as you've gone through your path of now becoming a father that you look back and recognize and go, oh man, maybe this was some past trauma from past ancestral lineage, or were things was a house filled with love?
Yeah. So I grew up two-parent household, like you mentioned. There was a lot of love in our household. I would say more so from my mom. Not to say that my dad didn't love us, but he just had a difficulty expressing and showing. He was very present, not to say he wasn't around. But when it came to speaking on emotions, touching on emotions, him expressing his emotions, us being allowed the space to have our emotions, there wasn't much of that. But nonetheless, we had a blessed childhood. I have two siblings, so I was the oldest. I'm the eldest child. And childhood was great. My parents literally did whatever they could just to kind of remove us from the traditional and typical places that we were supposed to be raised. My mom's from the west side of Chicago. They moved us as far north in the city of Chicago as we possibly could. And from there, they just always stress, going to school, getting good grades, having a good education, something to fall back on. And so I think I changed schools 6 times from the time I was, in pre-K until 6th or 7th grade. And it was always a situation where my mom, I guess, had planted the seed in all my teachers' heads or minds, hey, if this gets too easy for him, let me know. And if you can't, challenge him anymore, I have to pull him out and put him in another school. So I was bouncing all over the place.
I love the fact that your parents took on an active role, because so many parents don't take on an active role and they miss out on, and I'm going to call it that genius in their child, but just a lot of kids that that they get lazy, not because they don't want to do the work, but because they're bored. So
Yeah.
kudos to your mom for recognizing that. And I wish
Yeah.
more parents would take a more active role. And, they may have the next doctor, engineer, next lawyer, but sometimes we just get stagnant. So
Absolutely.
that's
Absolutely.
powerful message for you parents too. Take an active role, and I love what your mom did. Is hey, if this isn't challenging enough for my son anymore, let me
Hmm.
know because he's out.
Yeah.
I
Sir.
love that. I freaking love that. Let me ask you a question because you're from Chicago, and I have
Hmm.
family in Chicago, in Indiana, and the surrounding area. And man, just the chaos that the inner city has experienced. And
Hmm.
I'm just get your perspective because you're native of Chicago. Now, you're blessed that they pulled you away from that as much as possible, but
Hmm.
you're just kind of looking at it from the uh, outside, from within, the community.
Hmm.
What what is the underlying problem that's going on that we're seeing such a shift in crime and violence? Is it something that starts at home, or is
Hmm.
it just a victim of circumstances? And I can relate because I grew up in Compton, California, which at the
Okay.
time when I grew up, we experienced the same thing. But I'm just curious, like, what what is your perspective on that? Especially because, like I said, as a father now, growing
Hmm.
up, and then also now taking on that spiritual path.
Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful question. I think it's one that should be posed more frequently. And I'll speak firsthand experience, but then I'll also speak general as well. I'll start with the general. The city of Chicago is a beautiful place. I think we do have a bad rep because there is a ton that does go on here. Um, but growing up, like I said, my parents tried to distance us from it. That's not to say that they could keep us out of harm's way completely shield us from everything that was happening in the streets. Um, I've had family members who were like, I guess, the examples of what not to do. And then I've also had, you know, great examples of what to do. And so I kind of got a chance to see both spectrums. So I like to say I'm book smart and street smart.
Mm.
Um, and so growing up, being on the north side of Chicago, a lot of my family was on the west side or the south side. So, it's not to say that I didn't ever experience those things. And then I also had situations where some family members were a part of the streets. Just to be frank, my dad, was a hustler, just to keep it 100. He came here with no money in his pocket, and he had to make a way, and he did the best that he could to get us to where we're at, putting all of us through school and whatnot. But it's still, like, I guess you could say, it's in the blood, it's in the DNA. And so what I see now, being active in the community, working with the youth, um, I see a lot of it being systemic, but also there is a victim mentality on both. So there's both sides. There's the system, and then there's, hey, we want to lean on the system because we don't want to take ownership of what is going on here. And so I think, as I work with the youth, and I've had an active role in the community, working with young families, with folks who are in, you know, unforsaken circumstances. Um, it's just really being able to empower families who are willing to do something about their situation is beautiful. But then it also hurts on the other end, where you see situations where the kids are being affected because parents are making poor choices. Um, and so I think, what could be done is more community outreach, being active in the community, and just having examples, working with a lot of the youth, especially young men here in Chicago. They tend to respond well when you actually meet them where they're at. So I have a lot of situations where, folks are coming from, that can't really relate to these youth here in the inner city. And yes, the help is good, but they can't really relate. And so they're not being as open or as vulnerable. And it's really hard to reach someone if they're not open, right, to receive. And so I've just really been able to humble myself to be able to meet them where they're at, have the communication and dialogue, and be able to provide support when support is either asked for, when they're open to it. And it's been received well. There's a lot of good things going on here in the city, and obviously there's also the other side of the coin. I just feel like more of the positive needs to be highlighted. And if it is, I think that gives us an opportunity to have a different, a different headline in the news.
So you're able to interact with a lot of different families that, have youth that are experiencing different types of, I'm just going to say obstacles, challenges in their life.
There you go. Mm-hmm.
You being a newer father, um, how important do you think it is that a father show up in their children's lives?
I think it's extremely important. I think having a father in your life really sets the tone of how you relate anywhere else in life. And what I mean by that is, I've grown up with friends who went to school with me whose fathers weren't around, and just the way that they carry themselves, the confidence about themselves was different, right? How easily influenced they were was different. And I can say that because I saw my father show up and be the father for a lot of these other, boys in my life, right? So I can think to like situations and circumstances where it's like, hey, this was my friend before I introduced him to my dad, and before my dad started to pour into him as if he was his own son, and just a complete 360, complete 180. And then upon graduation, this person's mother or even father is coming back around and thanking my father just for being there when he wasn't there, or my mother for allowing them to be at our house when they weren't around. And so, like, I think having a father in your life, it's been so beneficial for me because my dad, he was literally the guy who he talked about everything. He didn't leave anything uncovered or unturned. He's like, I want you guys to have the best foot forward. My whole intent coming here from Nigeria was, hey, the next generation needs to be further along than I was, and so that was really the thing that really kept me going. It motivated me. It kept me in line. He was strict. We did have rules and regulations. He ran it like almost militant, but as much discipline as there was, like I could complain about it then, but now looking back, it's like it literally saved me because I could have been caught in the streets and lost in the mix. And who knows where I would have ended up. So I think having a father for young boys is important. But then also for young ladies, I don't have any daughters, but I've just seen and heard the effects. And I think having a father in a young woman's life is extremely important because that's her first, interaction with a man. It gives her the first example of what she's looking for in a man, how she needs to feel safe in that type of container. And it goes both ways, father and son, but I think fathers are extremely important, not to knock mothers because they play an even larger role. But yeah, fatherhood is huge.
Well, I'm gonna share something that I did on the last podcast. As I
Mm-hmm.
stumbled onto something just on the last day, and there was two guys in the military, and there was this one young guy, he's super fly and getting all the girls, and so the guy's just looking at him, I guess they call him like a fuck boy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the guy looks up and says, "Hey, let me ask you a question." He says, "How can I get my daughter when I have a daughter? How can I get her to not fall into your trap and end up with you?" And he says, "Oh, I can tell you the answer. Just always tell them that you love them." And he says, us players out there, we can tell um, girls that have daddy issues from miles away. And we
Yep.
seek that out and we can become predators to them. So when you tell a little girl that you love them and you reaffirm that and you
Mm-hmm.
constantly show up for them, what you're doing is you almost like you're creating these standards for them that
Yes.
these players, it makes it a lot harder for them to manipulate them or just make them a statistic. And I just,
Absolutely.
just because you're talking about that, it came up again that that's just such a powerful tool and such an easy tool that mothers and fathers can use is to
Mm-hmm.
constantly show love because there's a lot of parents out there that do not speak verbally. They
Exactly.
don't articulate love. And I'll give you an example. My mom was one that I knew she loved me and she showed me, but I love you was foreign. It wasn't a word that was
Mm-hmm.
used up until I started my journey. And then I kind of started to force it
Mm-hmm.
by just saying it. And then now it's become a natural conversation. But
It's
I
beautiful.
was, I guess it was just a norm. So I never realized it. But then
Mm-hmm.
as I've started to self analyze, the circles around me, it's like, wow, people just don't express themselves. They don't
Yeah,
speak and verbalize like love. And it's sad. It's sad.
it is. It is. I mean, I think what that's a great point, and even to sons, like I can definitely attest, because we seek validation, from our parents. When we don't hear that affirming conversation, that affirming language, it's like, where do we get it from? And I know that I got it whenever I achieved something, whenever I, had some type of success was when I received the most of it, right? And so back to that point, affirming language, from your parents, I try and affirm my sons all the time. I do affirmations with them. I tell them I love them. Like I, and my boys are like extremely emotional. And I have a Scorpio son, and he is extremely emotional. So like just being present with him, and again, those affirmations and just loving on him, hugs, kisses. Like my dad gave hugs, but like again, like you said, saying I love you, expressing those things to us, it was foreign for sure, especially in Nigerian culture. Like men are super stoic, no emotion is shown. I'm sure it's similar. It's almost like this machismo type of energy. It's like you don't need to see me in my emotional states. Yeah,
The only time it comes out in the cultures of machismo and so forth is when they're drinking.
there
They
you
didn't want
go.
to all emotional. It's like, why
There
can't
you
you do
go.
this when you're sober?
Yep, yep.
So
Yeah.
your boys are 4 and 3.
Yes, my
Okay.
oldest will be 5 in November, and my youngest just turned 3 in March.
So I'm going to introduce some to you that I'm not sure if you're going to be doing with your boys, but it's something that
Mhm.
I started to do with my first daughter, and then I just kind of lost track along the way. But the power of reading,
Mhm.
and when they wanted something, I would reward them based on how many books they read. And by being able to do that, I was able to expose my oldest daughter to so many different authors and they're in fiction, nonfiction. And because of that, her just appetite for knowledge
Mhm.
was just incredible.
I
And
love
I
that.
wish I would have carried on that tradition with my two youngest. I will with my granddaughter now that she was just born. But I just want to offer that as a food for thought is the power of books and to make sure that if you haven't already started to think about that, because they're
Hmm.
now getting at that age where
Yep.
they're going to start transitioning into, learning to read the little books and storytelling. Man,
Hmm.
don't ever dismiss the power of books because with, social media and
Can get
audiobooks now
lost.
and all this, like everything's changed with AI. So, you know,
Yep.
we get them to the library, so that's been my one of my big passions this summer is talking a
Hmm.
lot about taking them to the library and doing story time and not
I love
forgetting
that.
about just grabbing a book. I say old, grabbing a book and just being able to go through it.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. I appreciate that. And I'm definitely taking that. And like my dad always says, keeping it in my left hand. My boys love to read and they love numbers. So that's something that we're already it's already in our evening practices. It's like a book or we're doing something with numbers, counting beans, whatever we need to do to kind of keep their minds stimulated. So,
mm. Since you brought up math, I have to bring up something I just stumbled on is I guess Apple came out with a new release.
mm,
And with this new release, if you go in and you write into the app the problem and you put the equal sign or the slash, it'll solve the math problem for you.
oh Lord,
And
here
it's
we
like, oh
go.
my goodness, they're just taking away all the learning away
Yeah.
from kids. So even technology as we're becoming so advanced now, especially with
Mhm.
AI, which is, man, I went to go order food this morning and there's no cashiers. Like
Nope.
you've got to order from the kiosk,
Yep.
and if you don't know how to order from the kiosk, they're not going to help you in the back like that.
Yeah.
So this has such a shift with technology.
Huge shift, huge shift. We try and be mindful with the boys too. Like they they don't have iPads. I mean, they have them, but we don't give them to them often. We limit TV time. My boys are great. They love playing. I mean, they're fighting every now and then, but that's boys. They're the same age, fighting over the same toys. But if they can be outside and on the grass and in nature, like I take them on hikes with me just to keep them stimulated and active. Like I think a couple weekends we went on a 3.5 mile hike. Of course, they're complaining it's hot, but and my youngest occasionally he's like, I got him on my shoulders, but then he'll get down and then he's running along for 5-10 minutes, and then he'll come back and he's like, I'm tired. But it's a good time, getting them out in nature. Because I look at kids nowadays, and they're either on the game, on their phone, on an iPad, and they don't even know what this concept of being outside is. Like, what is outside? Me and my brother used to play outside for 4 hours, 5 hours. My mom would have to beg us to come home and eat. And like kids these days, they just don't do that anymore.
Yeah, the saddest thing that I see, and I see this every time I go out, is looking at a family sitting around at a dinner table
And
at a restaurant.
everybody's like this.
Yeah, it's sad. I had lunch last week. I went and grabbed some needs in between meetings, and mom and her son. So son's probably about 13, 14 years old. I kid you not, the whole time I was there, the only time they spoke was when the mom told her son that, oh, they called our number. Then he went, got the tray, sat down, and she continued on her phone. He continued on his phone. And this was probably a half an hour in, and I left, and who knows if they had any more communication. It was sad. It broke my heart, to be honest with you, because I don't know what kind of relationship they have. I don't know their story, but just the fact that, especially when kids are teenagers, you don't get that much time anyways. They don't want to be around mom and dad. They're in this just kind of a weird transition. So to be able to just captivate them, yes, for that little bit of time, man, put the damn phone down. Take advantage of that opportunity, you know?
Seriously.
And it's an epidemic. Like, I would say it's probably a global epidemic
For
that this
sure.
is happening.
For sure. For sure. That was something that I co-parent now, me and my ex-partner. That was something that we made like a big point was, when we're with the kids and we're spending time with the kids, let's be present. And not only the conversation between her and I, but like the boys make us aware of it too. Like they'll let us know, like pay attention to me in some way, shape, or form. And if we don't pay attention, what I've found is like days that I don't, like they will do things to get in trouble just to get your attention because that's the only way. And so like when that become I've seen it with friends and other families, it becomes a cycle. It's like, why is the kid always getting in trouble? They just want your attention. That's really what it is. They're not troublemakers. That's the only time you give them attention.
You know, wow, that's so true.
Yeah.
Talk about accountability. So my girls are 27, 21, and 20.
Mm-hmm.
I recently went to Universal Studios with my 21-year-old and her boyfriend, and her big thing is about me being on my phone. But I'm like, okay, they're older. I have a little bit of
Mm-hmm.
more of a grace period. We're at
Yeah.
Universal Studios, and I'm just responding to clients and stuff. And she turns around and scolds me. I thought you weren't going to be on your phone. And I'm like, oh. So even as they're, when you start to set that tone and you set that as that's going to be the new norm, they're going to hold you accountable. And so I'm like having to sneak into the restroom and go return freaking clients or kind of do it, behind her as I'm waiting in line. But
Yeah.
yeah, once you set that expectation for them, they're going to hold you accountable to it. So you need to make sure that if you're going to hold them accountable to it, we as parents, we have to be accountable to it too.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
tell me about this dynamic of how co-parenting is working with you, with the
Yeah.
two young sons.
Yeah. So my boys, they're extremely in tune. So of course, when before it all happened, we both sat down. It's a ton of respect, reverence for one another. There's still love there. We still communicate. We were just very intentional about how we approached it. We didn't want it to be typical and traditional. Like she's Latina, she's Mexican. I'm Nigerian, and typically when people separate in our cultures, it's this whole ordeal. There's a long drawn out lawyer situation. We had no lawyers. We had one day in court and we wrapped it up like clean. But again, it was because of our preparation beforehand. We were two of the happiest people in the Zoom courtroom because it was over Zoom. And we're just sitting there and we weren't together when it was going on, but we're just sitting there and like I could see her face, she could see my face, and we're just like, man, like these are some pretty horrible conversations. Like just the energy in the whole room was just heavy. And I could just tell we're both like, can she just call our name so we can just get out of here? Like we've already got this ready to go. Like no lawyers. So it was very cordial. But that was always our conversation. We wanted to make sure that the kids are the most important thing. And so we just wanted to make sure that even though like during this season in time, this isn't working out for us, like we don't have to make this a situation where one of us we're bickering back and forth. One of us is bitter. No, it was we like to call it a conscious uncoupling, right? So it was very intentional. The boys have taken it well, but I also think that's because of how we've done so. We both get equal time with them and we also still spend time together. So it's like they don't see us never together or never happy. And so I just think we're navigating it extremely well. Obviously, there's separate work that has to be done. There's also holding space for one another. And I just have a ton of respect for her, the way that she's approached it and allowed us to do so, because if I'm being honest, it could have been completely different, especially me being the man. I could have been dragged. Just, we know how this goes, right? So I always thank her graciously for that. But yeah, our boys are doing great. They're still happy. Not much in the beginning, a little bit had changed in their behavior just because they were missing each other. But when they're with her, I can still call and, tell them good night and things of that sorts, and then vice versa. So it's been beautiful. It's been different than what most people see. And I just love to kind of be an example for that it is possible.
I love that because so many families that are ending relationships and trying to dabbling into the co-parenting, they take a lot of their hurt and pain from each other's relationships and it passes on to the kids.
Yeah.
So what would be some best practices or solutions that you would give a couple right now that are in a place where they're in the process of starting to separate? And the reason I share that is, although when we started this platform for fathers, it actually kind of shifted, and we have a big audience of women that are dealing with toxic, baby daddies, that they're dealing with. So, and then we've had a lot of kids come on to figure out why their parents are the way they are. So it's just such a diverse, platform. So I think, any tools you have to share on how you guys were able to do the work beforehand help to make it an easier process, because separation is already ugly, right? And then divorce is ugly, and then when you have kids in the mix, it can become a shit show, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I love the fact that your audience has grown and it's bringing in women also, obviously fathers are listening to it as well. I would say for us, we had been on spiritual journeys in past before all of this kind of transpired. And it's tough, right? Because it really takes two people deciding that we both want it to go a certain way and we don't want it to go another way. If it's one person who's trying to make it cordial and the other person's just completely, they're like, whatever, which is typically how those situations happen. It's like either the father is like, F you, this is bogus and I still want to make it work, or whatever the case may be. But typically it's one side wants to make it work smoothly and the other side is, no, I'm gonna throw a monkey wrench in all of this and mess it up as best as I can, right? So number one, it takes two people who are willing. Number two is like having the conversations and not making any like rash decisions, and trying our best. We tried our best not to be malicious in any way, not to like aim to hit below the belt. we kind of took the higher route. Like we were both already working on getting to our higher selves. Not to say that we were there, not to say that we ever will be there, because healing is a lifelong journey. But it really takes being committed to doing the work. And the work is the shadow work. The work is our own inner child, wounds, dealing with our own traumas. Like it's really hard to have a conversation with someone who's already triggering you if you haven't sat with the reasons why those triggers are there. So we did that stuff beforehand. We were on the path of doing that stuff beforehand. And I think that is what allowed us to have a space to even have that conversation. And then on a man's front, like moving into men's work, is like we set the temperature of the relationship. We set the temperature of how conversations flow. And so I was very intentional with bringing intentions into the conversations. I was intentional with my energy going into the conversation, not allowing myself to be triggered and reactive and combative, and really holding a container for her to say what she needs to say, express the feelings that she needs to express. Obviously, some of it is triggering me, but like in that moment, that's not my time and space to be like, but ... Like I'm not, there's no reason to be defensive right there. Like we're clearly going on this path to separate and divorce, whatever the case may be. Let me at least allow her to express and get off what she needs to get off. And then if I feel like I can come back and it's a good space to do so, then I will. If not, maybe it's tabled for another conversation. But just as a man, having the mindfulness and being able to hold that container, but also speaking your truth in a way that can be received by the feminine, right? We don't need to yell and scream and shout and all this other stuff, or curse or disrespect. Nothing gets solved when that type of energy is brought to the table. And so I just kind of like tried to make sure that that wasn't the case. And a lot of times, your feminine partner or your partner will match the way that you show up. And so that's, those are just some tips. I mean, there's probably so much more I could dive into, but that's like deep shadow work, deep healing. So yeah.
No, thank you for that. That helps. And the one I am going to add is your ego and pride for
There
you
you go.
men.
Yeah.
That as you are, I love how you said that, the men kind of create the temperature
Mm-hmm.
of the relationship. So the ego and pride is what can really send things sideways. Sometimes
That's true.
some of the most innocent, very simple conversations that should be easy to resolve issues as you're starting to dabble into this co-parenting can turn into just a sideways circus because of ego and pride, or
Yeah.
so definitely something we have to check our egos at the door when we start to have those conversations. And I
It's
love
true.
how you said that container. The one thing I will add is sometimes we have to be okay with the other person not being ready to receive what you have to
Great point.
share, because even now, and I'll use my kids as an example, sometimes I'm not ready to receive what they have to say.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm learning to, not that it's not important, but at that moment in time, my cup is full.
Mm-hmm.
And adding more to it may bring out ego and pride, and I may shut it down when it requires maybe a longer conversation. But I just want to shut it down, get to the solution. And now I dismiss their feelings. I dismiss, maybe they don't want the solution to the problem, but they just wanted a safe place to be able to express.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And so I'm still learning the power of just being able to just like, hey, I'm not ready to receive it. And then sometimes they get upset. Sometimes they get upset, but knowing that in the end, it's going to serve the relationship as a whole better than in that moment.
Yeah,
So
that's a great point, because even having those conversations, like before we have those conversations, we need to ask, do you have capacity for this conversation? And if not, okay, then we need to revisit it. So yeah, that just came to mind as you were speaking. It's like, do you have capacity? Is there time and space for this? Yes or no? Because there's been situations where it's like, we know we need to have a conversation. We both want to have a conversation, but it's like, yeah, but the kids are up. or we're only going to see each other for 30 minutes here, just in passing, dropping them off. This is not the greatest time to have this conversation. So we have to table it. And, because we're not together, sometimes that could be a week or 2 weeks. It's like, I really wanted to. And you could try and blab it all out in that moment, but nothing gets solved in that moment. So,
yeah. And it's, like I've said this many times, is we live in this world of instant everything just in the
gratification.
moment.
Yep.
We want it in that moment, because we can just go to the computer, we can seek out answers, we can pick up the phone, but life doesn't work like that.
Exactly.
And we have to be okay with just, hey, sometimes people, we're dealing with emotions, or we're dealing with, the psychological and the emotional aspects. And sometimes we just have to give it its grace and just allow things to just, one of the best, something that came to me when I was in ceremony, I was in Peru in the jungle, sitting with ayahuasca. And I was struggling with some areas of my life. And one thing that came to me that has always stood with me is I remember the medicine coming to me and saying, you don't need all the answers. And that right there just lifted like so much weight off of my shoulders, because we want answers. We want to bring closure to things, but you don't always need the answers to everything. Sometimes you just have to let it be and just move on.
I love that.
That was like one of the greatest, top 3 greatest gifts of medicine and wisdom that I received on this path to spirituality.
Yeah, I can relate. I literally had the same download in an ayahuasca ceremony myself. And I think us men and fathers, we do so much, we give so much, we're looked at as we're providing solutions and answers. So like in situations where we don't have control or we don't have an answer, it's almost like we feel less than. And so I always was like needing control or needing to fix and to do and to please. And then in that ayahuasca ceremony, it's like, no, like you don't, like what happened to the femininity, right? What happened to flow in life, right? And us as men, we're like I don't have feminine energy. I'm just masculine. No, like there's masculine and feminine in all of us. And yes, our masculine is important. It's our drive. It's our discernment. It's our decision making. But then also, like you said, there's a space in life where we need to allow, we need to flow, we need to receive sometimes. And sometimes that what we're receiving is in the process of waiting and allowing. So I love that. I love that message and download, because I got the same one.
So I think this is a good transition into your experience going into the Amazon jungle.
Yes.
So I would love for you to share just a little bit of your experience and the trip that you took. And
Amazon, that trip was October of last year, and integration is still integrating. It's a lifelong thing, but it was something like, I'm grateful that I was doing the work before going on the journey, because I've heard a lot of people who have experiences with ayahuasca, and it's like like it was a crazy experience. Like I got like literally ran over by a train essentially. And so for me, the medicine had been calling me, excuse me, for a couple of years. And initially I didn't dive into it right away. I was like, let me do my research. I'm an engineer. So I'm like, let me do my research. Let me do my learning. Let me talk to some people. And it just kept showing up. I did the research. I was like, maybe this is for me, maybe not. And it just kept showing up. So that was the calling. I was blessed enough to go out there with 3 men who are a part of the men's group that I'm a part of now. And one of them is actually a captain with me, a part of our men's team here. And it was just such a beautiful experience. We spent 10 days in Ecuador. 6 of those days were in the Amazon, no cell service, no connection to the outside world. It was literally like it was a technology fast, a full circadian reset. It was just so beautiful, like not to have anything to worry about and to just be connected to nature. We swam in the Amazon River. We did 4-hour hikes. We did men's work, embodiment practices, learned from the the natives who were there, got a chance to connect with them and meet the shamans, see, how they cultivate and prepare the medicine. It was just such a beautiful experience. We did like a community exchange where we shared stuff from our culture and they shared things from their culture. And then there was also a situation where they had people bring in some of the things that they typically sell, necklaces, dream catchers, things of that sort. And we were, just energy exchange, paying, I love to call buying something an energy exchange because that's literally what it is. And so we were just, exchanging energy with them. My biggest takeaway from that trip was just the reconnection to myself. And when I say myself, I mean my inner child, and also working with fathering my own inner child. So it kind of cracked me open in a sense where I really got to dive into my full authenticity, but then also understand that like, don't leave my 5-year-old self behind, my 3-year-old self behind, my 7-year-old self behind, my teenage self behind. So like now with the integration piece, I'll find myself self-talking to the 3-year-old version of me, the 5-year-old version of me, the 17-year-old version of me, the 20-year-old version of me. Why? Because when we get triggered or when a memory comes up, or maybe we're in a state of bliss and joy and we're thinking back to the child, or maybe when we're like experiencing grief. I just lost my great grandmother this week, and a cousin of mine passed away. So like I'm sitting here in my apartment, in my home, fathering myself, and then also being a father. So like I got a chance to kind of feel my boys in a different way when I came back, to show up for them differently when I came back, and just this new embodied version of myself. And it's been beautiful. This is like the most authentic I've ever been in my life, like in person, online, with myself and my self accountability. And it's been beautiful. Life hasn't felt greater than this. And like you said earlier, I'm my hands are like this. I'm not in control. Like I'm just following with what's flowing, and it's beautiful. Ever since that experience, it's been flow. I've surrendered, and it's been amazing so far. And I'm just looking forward to what else is to come.
And I'm looking here at your Instagram, and so you're a facilitator now,
Mm-hmm.
and advisor and a coach. So tell us about that.
Yeah. So after leaving engineering, I dove into financial advising with a company most people know, Northwestern Mutual. That's where I got my training and certification from. And not to say there's anything wrong with Northwestern. I love Northwestern. The people there were great. Community was great. I just felt called to do more. And so being a part of the men's group, something that I've become extremely passionate about. I also believe that women have been sitting in circle for centuries, decades, and holding space for the collective. And us men have just kind of hit the tip of the iceberg over the last 50 years. And so I really feel like the shift in the collective, humanity, and what Mother Earth needs right now is for men to become more embodied. And so it's something that is like a driving force for me. I know how much it's affected me and how I've seen it affect my relationships with my mother, with my siblings, with my ex-partner, the respect and reverence I have to women in general. And so I'm just a firm believer that this work needs to be shared more frequently. And so I also have a breathwork facilitator certification through Somatic Release out there in California. And so I kind of have like this, I guess you'd call it a niche. Like I mix my men's coaching with offering breathwork to help men process and get through trauma that we typically suppress. And I'm sure you're familiar, like anything that's suppressed and not felt becomes repressed and depressed in the body, and it shows up as dis-ease. And, we may end up, it may be like, it may blow up. Anger shows up in ways that we don't want it to. And so just using that as one of the tools in my coaching to help men out. And then I also have a financial piece and a pillar to my coaching practice. So I kind of like merged all three into one. and kind of put together this like holistic approach. Because I've seen a lot of coaches, and it's not to knock any of them, but finance is a huge piece of our lives. And a lot of the coaching that I had been a part of and received was always like mindset. And you're familiar being a part of Danny Morell's program and Awaken. It was a lot of mindset, and it was like top down approach. And I just love the bottom down approach, really diving into the emotional realm of things, the trauma work that needs to happen. And I just love sharing that. I'm feeling called to like open it up to work with women as well. I was hesitant at first, but now I feel extremely grounded in how I can hold space, and that situations wouldn't arise where, it can get like lines can be blurred. And I was like, I don't know if I want to do that, but I've gotten so much great feedback from the women in my life. It's like, man, I wish more guys like were like you, or could have these conversations, or it could be a friendship and it not lead to anything sexual. So yeah, who knows what's going to happen, but just really feeling called to continue sharing this work.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that. And thank you for giving back to the collective by offering, all these different services that you were called to, to serve.
Yeah.
I want to ask you a final question about your journey, and that's how sitting with the medicine, how it's impacted you as a.
Yeah, that is a beautiful question that I reflect on often. I think of myself before the work and the medicine, and the two medicines that I have participated in is psilocybin and ayahuasca. Before that, I was completely detached from my heart chakra. Like, it was completely closed. I lived up here. Everything was from the mind. Everything was thinking, doing, building, creating. All of my self-value and self-worth was like tied into like what I could do, not who I was. After the medicine cracked my heart open, it's like, wow, I am emotional. I do have space to allow my emotions to come through. And so the way that shows up with my boys is, I had times where I had mushroom journeys where I would literally cry out and release, like, man, I'm repeating the same pattern of how disconnected my dad and his dad was from his kids. And it was those mushroom journeys that just literally like peeled back the layers, until it got to the point where it's like, now my heart is fully open. And I show up with my boys like full authenticity. They've seen me cry now. They have space to share their emotions. Because that's one thing, like in the Nigerian community, is like, if you're crying, the first question is, why are you crying? You shouldn't be crying. You're a boy. Be a man. Toughen up. I don't do that with my boys. If they're having a moment, I have a conversation with them. I try and talk that out with them. What's going on? How can I support? And it's, I love it because I've just seen them grow. Now they're so expressive. Like, people ask me all the time, like, what school do you have your kids in? Like, my boys don't, like, they're not in school yet. And I honestly, we're probably not planning on putting them in school. We want to world travel with them and just let, travel in different cultures be their education. But I literally tell them all the time, I've never talked to them like they were babies. I've never talked to them like they were kids. And they just pick up, and, I just allow them to express, especially my oldest. He could talk to you for days. Like, literally, I have to tell him sometimes. I hate telling him this, and I don't say it to him, but it's like, everyone is not your friend, yo. and like, he'll hear me mumble it, and he's like, no, everybody's my friend. Like, I have friends everywhere I go. And so yeah, you're right. You have friends everywhere you go. And he literally believes that. And that's how they show up, just open-hearted. They're both open-hearted. They both wear their emotions on their sleeves. And I just love every second of it. At times it's trying, but it's like, I don't want to suppress their true being. Because what I noticed in my childhood is, because I wasn't able to express, because I wasn't able to really talk about my feelings and for years, my throat chakra was blocked. My boys don't have that problem at all. They will speak their truth regardless of who they're talking to or where they're at.
I love that. Just like the new song, "They Not Like Us."
They not like us,
They're
literally.
not like us. So kudos to you, man. What a beautiful man. It just went by so fast.
It
We just
did.
got
It did.
talking, and any closing thoughts as we start to wrap up a beautiful episode on Fatherhood Voices? Closing thoughts from you.
Yeah. First and foremost, just want to thank you for having me on the platform. Just speaking from my experience, if you're a father, young father, even a father whose kids are a little bit older, um, from my experience with my father and how our relationship is now, um, just showing up, doing our own inner work can help create avenues for others to open up to their own work. So my dad has started to become a little bit more expressive just because I'm expressive. My relationship with him has grown and developed tremendously. My relationship with my mother, same thing with my siblings. So really taking ownership, removing this whole victim mindset and becoming the victor, and take pride in being a father. It's important. The world needs more present, like present fathers. And I think just fatherhood is a beautiful journey. My boys teach me so much about myself on a day-to-day basis. Give yourself grace, because it's not always going to be peaches and cream. There's going to be times where you're like up late at night, like, damn, am I a good father or not? At the end of the day, as long as you're trying your best and putting your best foot forward, your children will feel it, and nobody can ever take that away from you. So that's what I'll say.
Thank you so much for such beautiful words of wisdom. And as we wrap up another episode of Fatherhood Voices, like you shared, sometimes you just have to show up, and there's nothing else you have to say. Just show up and be the best version of yourself. And
Exactly.
it's contagious.
Sure
And that's how you
is.
start to change the ancestral lineage in your family. Thank you.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure.